He was a writer, of course, and a feminist. Except he was a she. So there you go. Oops. So I've been reading 2 books this week. Well, in addition to a couple of others, but it's these 2 books that got me thinking about today's topic, really. And one of them is called Action and Passion by P.C. Wren, who you may know as the author of Geste. And the other is The Same Old Story by Ivan Goncharov. And what those 2 books had in common, for me at least, was that I know they have very famous works. And in Wren's case, of course, it is Geste. In Goncharov's case, it is the book Oblomov. Yet, their other works are largely unknown. They are, if you like, one-hit wonders, perhaps. And it got me thinking about what other one-hit wonders there are. I mean, there are very obvious cases from the 20th century, I suppose, the likes of Salinger, Kennedy O'Toole, but, his book, of course, was published after his death. Margaret Mitchell, really, I guess, only wrote Gone with the Wind, as far as I know. These authors are very famous, but they're really only famous for that one work. Ralph Ellison, Invisible Man, Joseph Heller, Catch-22, Boris Pasternak, Dr. Zhivago. And it really, it just got me thinking that this is very interesting. And, I particularly like 19th century works and Edwardian works. And I very much enjoy looking at the Delphi Classics range, where they offer the complete works, or collected works at least, of a lot of these authors who have become forgotten to some degree. Or if they are remembered, they are really only remembered for one book. I mean, I came across, of course, the case of someone like Henry Rider Haggard, maybe very well known for 2 books, let's say, King Solomon's Mines and She. So I didn't think he really fit, because I could name off the top of my head 2 books that they wrote. But I was thinking, who can I name? What authors can I think of where I know one book and don't know anything else? And the funny thing is, they were very prolific in their time. They wrote a lot, and they would not have been considered one-hit wonders back in the day. But as time's moved on, a lot of their work has just been forgotten. 1 or 2 things stand out, primarily one in the cases that I'm going to go through. I mean, have you ever heard of The Fair God, or The Chronicles of Count Antonio, or The Scarlet Shawl? I mean, perhaps Steve Donahue has, and maybe 1 or 2 others, but I haven't. But I certainly know the authors of those books, and you will too. Hello everybody, welcome to and welcome back to my channel, Book Time with Elvis, with me, Mark. I apologise for the slightly dishevelled look, though perhaps my hair does look a bit better than normal, but that's because it's absolutely pouring buckets outside, and Elvis and I are soaked. He's gone to bed, which he always does. I try to towel him off, but he still goes and dries on my bed, so it's nice and fragrant for me when I choose to retire later on. So I wanted to look at some of the one-hit wonders of the 19th century. Although they might just be one-hit wonders of the 19th century today, and maybe not so much one-hit wonders at the time they wrote their books. I'm sure you will know all, if not most, if not all, of these authors, and you will probably know the books that I'm going to mention, but you might not be able to name much else that they wrote. And then it got me thinking, could this be weaponized into a tag where people can talk about their favorite one-hit wonders? And yes, so I'm leaving this as an optional, there's a weaponization option on there. So for other people who have channels and want to provide their favorite or intriguing one-hit wonders from any era, then I invite them to do so. And of course, anyone who just wants to comment below on some books that they like that are also by one-hit wonders, please leave comments below, as I say. So I've got 10 of them to go through. One of them, the first one I want to look at, is Samuel Butler, and you'll know him for his book Erewhon, I guess, which was an 1872 satirical novel that explored themes of utopia and dystopia, as well as the nature of consciousness and free will. Butler, of course, was a Victorian author, and he did write other works, but I'm sure you can't name any of them. And if you can, that's great, but you've probably heard of Erewhon, at least. Now, the next author was someone mentioned yesterday by my good friend, I think it was yesterday, by my good friend Sean D. Stanfast, and Michael K. Vaughan has recently, as part of his Rogers Cheap Old Free Book Club, Cheap Old Book Club, Free Cheap Book Club, Cheapest Chips Book Club, apologies Michael, I can never remember the name of it. For this month, February, people involved in that book club read Anthony Hope's The Prisoner of Zenda. Now, as Sean said in his video yesterday, Anthony Hope published over 40 books. Now, if you're really into it, you probably know the sequel, Rupert of Hentzau, and the prequel, maybe, I can't remember the name, I haven't looked it up, because that would kind of be cheating, because then I'd be pretending I knew it and I didn't. The Queen something, I think, but I might be wrong. But he wrote 40 books. But the only one, if I said to you Anthony Hope, if you heard of him at all, you would know he wrote The Prisoner of Zenda. So, today's standards and the way he's remembered, I suppose, as a one-hit wonder, or he is today, as I said, Another one, Lewis Wallace, who wrote Ben-Hur. Everybody knows the film, of course, or the films. But yeah, in 1880, he wrote Ben-Hur, A Tale of the Christ, which, of course, as we all know, is a epic romance or epic historical romance set during the Roman occupation of Judea, and it follows the Jewish prince Judah Ben-Hur, and obviously we get amazing chariot races, and he meets up with JC and all that kind of stuff. Now, Wallace was an interesting person himself. I didn't realize he was, he was a Civil War veteran, general by all accounts. And he was also a diplomat and a governor, so I found that particularly interesting. But he wrote, not that much. But yeah, certainly at least this book. Though, I say this book is known, I don't know. I don't know how many people actually do know that it is based on a book. I mean, if you say the film, everybody knows at least the Charlton Heston version. I'm not sure if everybody knows the silent film version. I'm sure, of course, Sean D. Stanfast will be sitting there going, well, I did, but okay, not that many others apart from Sean, maybe. And next up, another one I found rather interesting, because he's very famous in fields other than writing novels, which is William Morris, of course, the designer, famous of the arts and crafts movements, and he wrote a book between 1868 and 1870 called The Earthly Paradise, which is a collection of narrative poems that primarily deal with the retelling of certain classic legends and myths, looking at different themes like searching for meaning in life and love and loss and all that kind of stuff. But did you even know that he wrote novels as well? Or narrative poems? Did you know he was a poet? So yeah, I mean, you've heard of his designs, you've seen his designs. I mean, if you're from England and you're my age, you couldn't have escaped a design show in the 90s where they weren't talking about William Morris and his wallpaper and all that kind of thing. So next up again is a famous name, though more because of the author's granddaughter, and this author is George du Maurier, who of course, as I said, is the grandfather of one Daphne du Maurier, famous for a slew of wonderful books, whereas George, her granddad, is really only known today for one, his 1894 book Trilby, which is a romance set in Paris, a very bohemian part of Paris, following the exploitation of a young artist who falls under this kind of hypnotic influence of Svengali. And we've probably all heard the term Svengali used, around the theatre and entertainment industry. That's where it comes from, of course. Du Maurier himself was primarily known as being a cartoonist, and he did illustrations for Punch magazine. But again, could you name another book apart from Trilby? Maybe, maybe not. I'd be really interested if you can. And I'm really, as I say, really interested also to know what and who you consider one-hit wonders, what authors you consider, even if they weren't at the time they wrote. But, I suppose, what about Mary Shelley? We know she's written other books, but most people can really only name Frankenstein, right? So yeah, it probably goes for the Brontes as well. Yeah, so I'm really curious about this. Next up, we have George MacDonald, who wrote in 1858 a book called Fantastes, which I'd heard of. I've not read it. I've not read all of these. I'm intrigued by them, and I may well read them. But yeah, I'd certainly heard of it. It's a fantasy novel, follows the journey of a young man who enters a magical realm, and then he has to confront his inner demons. MacDonald, of course, was Scottish, you probably guessed by the name, and as well as being an author, he was a poet and a Christian minister. And apparently, he played a big role in the development of fantasy literature. So all of you lot out there who love fantasy novels, you probably have something, some debt to owe to him, possibly. Next up, we have Canadian-born Grant Allen, known for a book called The Woman Who Did, written in 1895, and apparently it was a very controversial novel as it explored themes of feminism and sexual liberation, not something you associate perhaps with the Victorians, as it followed the story of a young woman who defied social convention and chose to live as, of all things, a single mother. Can you imagine? Outrageous. Yeah. So, in addition to being an author, he was also a scientist, and he wrote a lot of stuff. If you get his Delphi complete works, there's a lot in there. But again, you're hard pushed, if you know him at all, you're hard pushed to know more than just The Woman Who Did. Up next, we have Richard Jefferies in his 1885 book After London, which is a post-apocalyptic novel. Yes, in 1885, they had post-apocalyptic novels that imagined an England, dear old England, after a catastrophic event, destroyed all traces of civilization. Their society had gone back on itself, had reverted to a medieval feudal system. Sounds good, doesn't it? To check that out. And again, Jefferies wrote this novel, but he also wrote a lot of nature books, and books especially on rural life, life in the country and things like that. We have our first woman in the official list that I compiled, Mary Elizabeth Braddon, and her 1862 book Lady Audley's Secret, a novel sensational in 1862, as it followed the story of a beautiful and mysterious woman with, of all things, a dark secret to hide. Again, she was extremely popular in her lifetime. She wrote over 80 novels. Can you name more than that one? Do you even know her at all? I don't know. I just find it really interesting that, and sad to some degree, that someone can write 80 novels, and you've probably heard of Lady Audley's Secret, but could you even name the author? And that's in some ways quite sad too. And then the fact that she leaves behind her this slew of works. And I don't really understand. I mean, I can understand in some cases why this happens, because maybe the books themselves aren't particularly good. I mean, I'm enjoying this PC Ren one, Action and Passion, but I could see it's not quite the same as beau geste. It's maybe not as good, but I suppose that's the nature of things, isn't it? And next up we have George Egerton, known for her 1893. I don't know what it is with all these women called George. Known for her 1893 collection of short stories that challenged the social norms of Victorian England as it looked at the lives of independent and unconventional women. The book, of course, I'm referring to as Keynotes. Egerton herself was, in addition to being a writer, an early feminist, and she wrote a lot of works that challenged social conventions, social expectations, and gender roles within society. So there we have it. There's a little list of so-called one-hit wonders, and as I said, I'd be really curious to know if you can add some to the list either down below in the comments, or as I say, if you have a channel and want to turn it, or weaponize it as they say, into a tag, feel free to do so, and I would love to see what you talk about. Everybody, thank you so much. Do take care. Bye for now.